129. Rotational Reforms. Chalcedon Report number 127, March 1976. In the modern era, reform has very often been a prelude to revolution, not because the reforms have not been needed, but because they have been stiffly rational in conception rather than realistic. The humanistic reformers have erred badly, first in developing rational programs for reform which are rootless and unrelated to the content of men's lives. Thus, instead of satisfying those whom they were intended to help, the reforms have only left them more disgruntled. The advances have often been very real, but they have not been welcome. Second, the humanists has concluded that the life of reason and of rational freedom is the most desirable life. But, unhappily, most people have preferred bondage, and their dream, like that of all slaves, is of bondage with plenty. An example of a reform which aggravated discontent was the abolition of serfdom in Tsarist Russia. It was a triumph of liberalism, but it created conditions which became a breeding ground for disaster. Serfdom in Russia was a modern product, only a couple of centuries old. Some serfs lived better than others, but most would have envied the life of an American slave. Their huts were without windows or chimneys, and without any artificial light, except for the limited use of bits of wood and tallow candles. The freezing cold outside made it necessary to keep newborn calves indoors. The serf, however wretched, had some security. Also, he regarded all of the Lord's land as, in some sense, his also. Quote, freedom, end quote, handed him over to the world of modern statism and taxation. He was at once taxed, and if he lacked the income to pay his taxes, he was imprisoned for at least 2 weeks. And then, if no funds were forthcoming, everything he had was sold, down to the family milk cow and chickens. If he had nothing, or if the sale failed to produce enough, he worked off the taxes in forced labour wherever the state officials chose to send him. In 1856, Alexander II told the aristocracy of Moscow, in preparing them for the emancipation of the serfs, reforms must come from above unless one wishes them to come from below. Unfortunately, the reforms from above came as disruptions and further tyranny to the serfs, and a distrust of everyone above developed. Reforms, rationally conceived at the top, are too often seen as disruptive and threatening to those below, and the result is the creation of a rootless mob below whose lifestyle has been broken, their loyalties shattered, and their conditions all too little improved. Statistically, the ex-serfs were in a much better condition. Realistically, they were discontented and felt cheated, and their discontent made it possible later for professional revolutionists to take over the country. Humanism has all too often failed to distinguish between reason and rationalism. Reason is a necessary tool in man's exercise of dominion, and it is basic to knowledge and is inseparable from righteousness, which requires, among other things, the intelligent understanding of and commitment to God's law. Rationalism is the rigid application of man's idea of reason to reality as the ultimate yardstick and criterion, whereas godly reason recognizes that it is the mind and reason of God which is ultimate. Rationalism thus tries to remake the world in its own image, after its own reason, and its end result is a collapse into irrationalism. It forces a product of man's mind onto reality in order to make reality man's creation. In the insane, this is unreason, whereas in humanistic planners, it is irrationalism. Rationalism once believed that the universe, to some degree, corresponded to man's reason, but now, with pragmatism and existentialism, it no longer believes this. The only area of rationality is in the mind of man, but in the light of Freud and Skinner, Modern humanism cannot place much trust in even that faint glimmer of rationality. It is held, however, that by some miracle, rationality will prevail in an elite group of scientific planners, and through them conquer humanity and the universe. As the new gods of creation, by whose fiat word the world is to be remade, they logically regard humanity as it is, as the realm of chaos. Out of this chaos, light and order are to be brought forth by their supposedly sovereign word. But will it? The new proverbs of humanism are marked by a wry and radical pessimism. If anything can go wrong, it will. If you see light at the end of the tunnel, it's not the sun, but a train coming. In the long run, we are all dead. A fool and his hope are soon parted. There is an increasing cynicism about all humanistic reform plans, and modern man is more and more concerned with only enough peace to enjoy himself. The philosophy is close to that of ancient Rome. Let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Give us more and more, men say, not reform and change, but a respite. But history requires change. It requires movement. Time does not recess so that an era can take time for play. Humanism is in power, but it cannot function as a motive force for action, production, and change. Its troops are no longer eager for orders, but rather eager for discharge. The time is ripe for a strong and virile Christianity, one firmly committed to biblical law, to command the day. Nothing else can provide a comparable motive force for the reconstruction of all things. Change is certain, but whether or not it will be progress depends on who controls it.